The Drift Crisis is a new release from Paizo for Starfinder, and we're going to talk about it. The Drift Crisis is entirely different from anything that Paizo has released before. It explores the idea of what would happen if one of the main forms of travel within Starfinder, the drift, was broken. What would you do? What kind of adventures could you have? And what kind of implications would there be for the god who created the drift? I'm going to tell you a little bit about what's in this new release, who should be getting it, my likes and dislikes with it, and of course, a final rating. First and most important question, what is it? What is the Drift Crisis? The Drift Crisis is a campaign setting of sorts. It's not a full-on setting because it's already part of the Starfinder universe. What it does do is provide more of a framework for adventures using a crisis of the drift. It does provide a bit of lore around the Drift Crisis. It also expands your character options. Now, all of the skills and all of the new themes, they are all specific and tailored to the Drift Crisis. Equipment, weapons, armor, monsters. There are also 20 adventure hooks to have your Drift Crisis in your own games. There is definitely enough story ideas, story hooks that you can take and run with for your tables and your games, but you will still have to build the adventure. If you're not already familiar with Starfinder, the drift is a very important aspect of interstellar travel, daily travel, economic trade. It was created by 3 gods who merged themselves into one super intelligent supercomputer god, and they invented the drift. Traveling in the drift is just faster than trying to use light speed. It's easier to get from one point to another. You have to lock onto a drift beacon, which sends out a signal. The stronger the signal, the easier it is to get to. And just because you've been traveling for a couple of days in the drift doesn't mean you've moved the same distance in the material plane. You can move a longer distance. You can move a shorter distance. It's a little bit wibbly wobbly in that sense. The Drift Crisis is one of several adventures within this book that you can figure out or use to break the drift. There is also a bunch of lore here around the Pact Worlds, the Vesperium, Near Space, how much they are struggling with the impact of the Drift Crisis and just your main form of travel not working. If you're not familiar with Absalom Station, this is the main trade hub. This is the main social gathering place in basically all of the Starfinder universe. When you can't travel to the main trading place or one of the easiest places to get to in the universe, what happens when you can't get there? For planets in the Pact World, specifically Akaton, they used to be the main generators or the main producers of starship fuel. Could you see Akaton returning to its former mining glory? Maybe the drift travel breaking is just the economic boost Akaton needed, and Akaton needed a lot of boost. Something else that you can find in here is a new plethora of drift monsters. You have 19 drift monsters and 1 starship. There wasn't any new character feats in this release. There was a fair amount of new spells added, along with items, weapons, and armors, equipment, special items, magic items. So there's a little bit of everything in this book, even though it's all specifically tailored to a drift crisis. There are even some ways or some ideas given within this book on how to integrate the Drift Crisis within the existing adventure paths and how you might tie them together. With all this being said of what's actually in the book, who should actually be picking this one up? I would say that this is going to be a book for GMs. Players, you're not really going to be missing much. In fact, if you haven't gone through any of the adventure paths, this book contains some spoilers for you to those adventure paths. While there are some interesting armors and weapons included in this expansion, most of them are going to be quite situational. If you're a GM who likes to take a perfectly good world and break it, then you're going to enjoy this supplement. And while we do have some ideas on implementing the Drift Crisis into existing adventure paths, such as Dead Suns, which is getting a special edition release later on, I believe this year, I'm really excited for that one. It also has write-ups for Against the Aeon Throne, Signal of Screams, Dawn of Flame, and Attack of the Swarm, Threefold Conspiracy, Devastation Arc, and Fly Free or Die, and that was a new adventure. It doesn't have anything on Junker's Delight though. Now there is a few things that I will put on my like list for this Drift expansion, or Drift Crisis, I guess. The art for this release has been on point. I can't always say that was the case for different releases or different expansions that have come out. Sometimes it's been pretty weird. We do get some more information on specific characters, NPCs within the Starfinder universe, as well as many of the factions and how they are handling the drift not working. The Hell Knights have been notoriously light on lore in the Starfinder setting. Can't say the same about it in Pathfinder, but for Starfinder, there hasn't been a ton related to the Hell Knights specifically. One of the adventure hooks that I really liked explores one of the more interesting areas of Absalom Station, the ghost levels. This is one that is kind of light on lore again, but the concept of the area is really intriguing. When it comes to the Veskarium, there's also an adventure hook about the Patra uprising on Vesk 6, or Pulanis, as the Patra like to call it, because that was the planet's original name. The brief history of this is the patrons they're not okay with the Vesk occupation of their planet. They are begrudgingly accepting of it, and the Vesk military presence on the planet is just enough that they can stop any uprising or keep the population at bay, basically. So when drift travel is cut off and your military is left to fend for itself, what happens? For me personally, this has always been a arc or a story idea that I have very much enjoyed. It's just one of the many things that has drawn me into Starfinder. And in this particular adventure hook, you are literally exploring what would happen if a military was cut off. And because of the military integration, you have the Vesk and the Patra working together, and the patrons are part of the Vesk army. They are part of the Veskarium. So you have these moral quandaries, these gray areas that you can explore about being part of a military that is oppressing your own people. What do you do? Combine that with the fact that the Vesk overlord of the planet is making all the wrong decisions and further alienating the patrons, which raises tensions. You'll also find some lengthy information on 5 NPCs that you can add to your adventures or use them for story hooks. I believe they are mostly new characters except for one, who is Zoe. Zoe is an interesting character because he is Eoxian, so he's undead, but he also runs one of the most successful game shows on television in the Pact Worlds. Now there's also a few things that I didn't like when it comes to this recent expansion. There was an interesting design choice where many of the items or the things that are part of the game, part of the index, if you will, they are represented in picture format. And there's nothing wrong with a picture format, but it's the first time that I have seen this used in their index. And while the art itself isn't bad and you still have a list index, it just seems a little odd to me that it's a single page with some pictures and page numbers for things that would be related to weapons or story hooks or NPCs. So I wasn't a fan of that particular thing. The list just works better. Now, the other thing that I was not a big fan of was basically the entire book. For me, it's just not something that will be used at the game table very much. And to be absolutely clear, everything in here is very well written, very well thought out, and reasoned for what it is. Paizo has a very high quality of standard when it comes to writing, when it comes to the stories and the things that they produce. The quality is there. I had such a hard time trying to reconcile what this book is, what it could be used for, what it should be used for. For me, it's the only miss that they've had over the last 4 years, which says a lot. It feels like it was born out of something that happened in Pathfinder Society, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. And maybe I'm completely off the mark here, but Starfinder Society is the organized play, and the events and choices that players make in the organized play of Starfinder Society, they can shape the world, they can shape the universe that is Starfinder. The concept of a persistent world is very intriguing. And for those who participate in the organized play, it can feel very important and very significant because your actions have consequences. So the supplement, I feel, was birthed out of something that happened with the organized play. And like I said, I could be wrong with that one, but that's just what it feels like to me. And because there's a little bit of everything in here, weapons, armors, character options, settings, adventure hooks, monsters, I don't know where to put it. I don't know how to classify it because it tries to be everything instead of focusing on kind of one aspect, which traditionally the previous releases have. Tech Revolution was specifically on high-tech gear. Galactic Magic greatly expanded the magical capabilities of Starfinder and your character options. You have your Armory, which was your item expansion, and Pact Worlds was a great expansion for the lore of the Pact Worlds. Nearspace did the same thing except for the Veskarium. Galaxy Exploration Manual tried to expand the universe as a whole. Starship Operations Manual was specific to starships and greatly expanded the offering for spaceships. Everything feels like it was designed around a unifying purpose. The Drift Crisis doesn't function like any of those previous expansions, and for that, it makes it difficult for me to classify it and know where to group it as kind of what it is. Some people were looking for it to expand just the concept of the Drift. The Drift is another plane of existence, another reality created by a god triune. And of course, there's problem resolutions. There's ways that you can fix the Drift, have things go back to normal. And this is where I have to give my final rating of the product and whether or not you think you should get it. My rating on this is going to be 2 out of 5 stars. The writing quality is there. For what it is good, it is well thought out, it is well reasoned, it is well integrated, and there are many options and tools that you can use as a GM to integrate this into your stories, existing or newly created. Totally up to you. Does this sit on the must-have list, like the Armory or the Pact Worlds or the Character Operations Manual? No. I think the ideas presented for adventure hooks or things that you can explore, absolutely, they are interesting. You don't necessarily need this book to explore those though. Now, if you're still asking yourself, what the heck is the Drift and who is this god triune who created it, you need to watch the video on your screen now. Thank you to my patrons for your ongoing support for me and the channel. It is all greatly appreciated. And I'm loving the super chats that are coming in as well. Thank you all so much for those, guys. My name's Nathaniel. Thanks for stopping by, everyone.